Do you want to talk about, back in the day, trying to get that right mix of survival? Because the inclination is, let's just make this fully systemic. Let's have her eating to survive, needing water to survive. How did you know how far to push it?
I mean, for us, exploring survival was a fairly broad exploration. It was less about deciding not to try those things, but more about actually trying a lot of those things on for size and starting to get a sense for what was working and what wasn't. And I think that one of the most common challenges was on the simulation end of survival, that it was often very cumbersome and often very downside design oriented, could be punishing, for example. And we absolutely wanted challenge. We wanted to create a situation where the player had to work for it in order to survive. But we didn't want it to be a situation where you were just managing health bars or hunger bars or some of these things. And in some ways, there was disconnect that became clear with things like that. If you wanted to encourage a player to explore a hub at their own pace, but they feel that every moment they're not collecting resources or progressing, that then they're in the middle of dying. And that started to detract from a certain amount of freedom to explore. And so rather than really asking players to manage resources in a hunger bar kind of way, we said, well, what are the more active elements of survival that the players can respond to, whether it be resource management in a more upside design kind of way. So things like the weapon crafting was more fun than a hunger bar, that it was cooler to get these resources and make your gear and your weapons better than it was to just have to continue to collect them, not to die. So we started to see this fork in the road and start to put different mechanics into each bucket of that's a bit too simulation oriented or cumbersome or punishing. And then we started to collect the ones that were just fun, that they felt like you had some of that almost Bear Grylls surviving in the wilderness feel, but that they were more upside design oriented. And part of where the word survival action came from for us was making this distinction between this survival simulation that didn't feel right versus this survival action that captured the flavor and started to channel those systems in a way that felt right with an action adventure game.
How much of a reference point during that development was Snake Eater? Did you guys go to that one a lot?
We did. I mean, we looked at a lot of examples, and we saw a lot of other games solve the problem in different ways. And in a lot of cases, it worked for those games, right? That different mechanics that may not have worked for us did work for them, and others that we saw in other games did inspire us in other ways. So it was one of those things where nothing mapped exactly directly to our needs, but it's always fun to see how other people solve the same problem.
I feel like during that game's development, there was kind of the rise of the survival genre. I feel like DayZ, Minecraft even to some extent, and I'm wondering if the popularity of that genre, especially in recent times, has kind of reshaped your thinking as far as how systems-based you can go with this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's great to see sort of the resonance of that experience on one level, that I think people really do enjoy being put in a situation where they do have to be resourceful and thoughtful and things like that. And so I love the idea that this resonates with people as broadly as it does. And it's always great to see other people's take on it. I think our approach to it is probably most directly informed just by where we got to in the first game and how we felt about it, and then subsequently what feedback we got. And so a lot of the most concrete inspirations for us was just to look at what we had done and how it could be better. But again, it's fun to see how other people solve the problems, and some of those served as inspiration for us as well.
Do you think it's made you guys more confident in the survival aspect of Rise of the Tomb Raider, just seeing the popularity of those other games?
I think for us, we had mapped out a longer arc for Lara that involved leveraging her survival experience in the first game as a foundation for which she'd build her ability to unlock secrets within these hostile locations. I kind of call it the unifying theory between raiding tombs and surviving in the wilderness, that it really is the key with which she can find secrets in these remote locations. So for us, there was already a natural fit there. Similarly, things like the bow and the climbing axe are very signature gear and felt like they really should be a continued part of her character. So I think in a lot of ways it was inspirational to us, but I think we had, before you even put it in the box, that you start to think about how you can build on that foundation.
So do you think that the reaction to the first game's survival elements has kind of motivated you guys to maybe push things a little bit further as far as the systemic survival aspects of Rise of the Tomb Raider?
Yeah, for us, we really wanted to make sure that participating in the survival systems were as meaningful as possible. So just taking hunting for an example, that hunting was featured narratively early in the game, but it didn't have as much significance in terms of your ability to succeed in the game as we would like. So we had a system that thematically fit well, but from a game design perspective, really had the opportunity to get tied in much more deeply, such that it was more than a thematic connection to the game, that it was really game design opportunities and new mechanics that the player could play with. And again, part of what I like about that sensibility is that it allows players to be a bit clever, that instead of just doing exactly what you're told, what resources are you going to collect and how are you going to use them, or how can you start to understand where to find a particular resource, or some of these things, that it starts to feel much more connected to the gameplay experience. So we were inspired by a lot of the feedback we got on the first game to really extend and enhance those systems.
So talking about upping the survival aspects of this game to some extent, does that necessarily imply then larger environments?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great things about doing it from the ground up on Xbox One is just being able to push scale, especially of hubs. That I think hubs are where survival plays out best, that a lot of times that you'll come back to there, there'll be opportunities to hunt and collect and get new stuff with your new gear, and then you go on a particular journey into a tomb or into a combat space or something, but then you'll always come back to those hubs, and those tend to be the best places to infuse those survival feelings as much as anywhere. And those are probably 2 to 3 times bigger this time, and to your point, I believe that really helps give a sense of a wilderness that is worth surviving in, and is offering more choices to the player in how they choose to do that as well. Well, I'm very excited to offer some extensions to our survival systems, that as much as we really try to blend a very finely paced linear narrative, one of the things we really celebrate as a product is placing that amidst a world of game design systems that offer player choice. And as a philosophy, we're absolutely on board, and we're pushing things much farther than we were able to in the last game. And so my hope is that people enjoy those extensions. Having said that, it is a balancing act, that in some ways we try to offer the best of both worlds, that you may find a more systemic game, but it might lack some of the pacing and memorability and narrative context that this game has. Or you might find a game with a heavy linear narrative story, but really doesn't offer as much systemic choice as our game. So I think what's most exciting to me is that we tend to fuse those both and try to achieve a balance that offers players really the best of both worlds in some ways.